High school, back in the 50s and 60s. It was a simpler time in America. The kids went to pep rallies and cheered for their football team. They danced to that wild rock and roll music. When the boys weren't playing football, they were doing things like working on hot rods and swimming naked in gym class. That's right. This program is about the history of naked swimming in American schools, a subject that many people have never heard of, even though it was widespread a few decades ago. In many states, in schools that had swimming pools, it was common practice to require the boys to swim without suits. This policy lasted in many areas up to the mid-70s. If you've never heard about any of this, you are not alone. When I started researching this program, I put a request for information on a discussion board for swimmers, asking for people to share their experiences. I got this response. I have been a PE teacher in the Midwest since 1979. I feel confident in saying any professional educator who allowed anything like this to happen would be fired, stripped of their teaching license, and taken to court for sexual misconduct with minors, probably sent to prison. I think whatever you are talking about is some kind of urban legend. Well, this guy started teaching in 1979, and it was common practice up to the mid-70s. So in just a few years, it went from standard practice to something that this teacher never heard of and refused to believe ever happened. So looking at the subject of nude swimming in school, I have two questions. One, why did they swim naked? And two, why have we forgotten about it? Why has it been erased from our consciousness? As to the first question, even some of the kids who swam naked back then didn't understand it, and they're still kind of baffled by the whole deal. One of those kids was Gary Meyer of Chicago. I'm talking with Gary Meyer of WGN Radio in Chicago. And how are you doing, Mr. Meyer?
Good, Dane.
And what school did you go to?
I went to, well, the nude swimming was at a high school in the neighborhood. I was in grammar school at the time. The school that had the swimming was Fanger. On the weekends, on Saturday, they would allow public swim, and that's where that all took place. So we could come in and swim on Saturdays, but it was a high school swimming pool.
At the time, how did you feel about that?
Well, as a 10, 11-year-old, I thought it was odd, but I don't know what was going on back then. I guess it was the era of no seat belts and plastic steering wheels and everything else. There were no rules, and we just kind of went along with it, and nudity seemed to be, I guess, part of the whole thing. We didn't question authority back then, at least I didn't. Having gone through a Catholic grammar school system, I just shut my mouth and did what they told me. It wasn't until several years later that I kind of questioned the whole process. And I do remember asking somebody that was in charge why we didn't wear suits, and I think the reason was he said that the swimsuits would bring sand in from the beach, and I thought, well, geez, I never go to the beach. I'm living in the city, so I don't know where that came from. It sounded like a half-baked reason. But again, I just kind of went along with it, and everybody else did too. And then as I got older, I realized this was happening all over the place.
From your perspective now, what do you think about the practice of swimming nude in school?
Well, now you'd be sued. You couldn't even do it, let's be honest. But it's funny, the stuff that sets off these lawsuits, you wouldn't be able to get near any nude swimming. How it lasted as long as it did back then, I'll never know. But today, forget about it. It's when you talk about it, for those who weren't around when it was happening, they think you're making it up, it seems. And they can't believe it happened in the scale that it did in a city of this size. And then I found out it happened around the country. Yeah, they think, oh, come on. But it seemed like, I don't know, things were different back then. Although where and why that happened, it's still hard to believe to me. And when you ask somebody today that maybe would have been in charge, I don't know what they'd say. I don't know what excuse they would give that would be halfway legitimate. I didn't really move in any direction where I thought, yeah, I'm glad I did that. That really built the self-esteem I needed. And at 10, 11, you're already feeling a little clumsy as you're going to puberty, so I don't know if that helped. I just kind of averted my eyes and stayed in the water a lot. Nobody that I remember questioned it or started to talk about it. On the Monday after the weekend we did it, we just kind of all thought, well, we start talking about it. We didn't have counselors back then, and psychiatry was considered voodoo. So we just kind of kept our mouths shut and hoped for the best, because I think it was all compartmentalized, and everybody kind of went along with it. And And today, if it was happening today with the internet and stuff, of course, you'd be jumping off a bridge if you couldn't handle it. But back then, everything was kind of simple, and people kind of kept their thoughts to themselves a bit more. And if there was any talk, it was done between one or two people. It didn't spread that quickly. And we assumed that, I guess, nobody else was doing it, so we should just keep our mouth shut or just go along with the program and leave it at that. So I guess it was kind of a thing where I didn't think about it until years later. And then I started to talk to other people that did it. And then it was like, you did that too? What'd you think? That was pretty bizarre. And we just went, oh, okay, and why do we do it? Because they told us to.
I guess at that age, that's a pretty good reason.
Yeah. Again, today, the 10-year-olds of today, they'd go, what, are you kidding me? But for some reason, I don't know what was going on back then. I can't completely clarify it in my head, but something must have been going on where you just thought, that's the way it is. Let's just go with it. Mm-hmm. Everybody seems to be doing it, so why should we question it? Mm-hmm. Well, maybe we can get in the hot tub time machine with our trunks on and go back to those days and find out what the heck was going on. All right, I'll just bury it again for another 20 years.
Well, we don't have a hot tub time machine, but we do have the internet that makes it pretty easy to do historical research. For most of history, swimming was an outdoors activity. Men swimming without women around generally swam without suits. If some women came by, the men were expected to cover themselves, not so much to prevent themselves from being embarrassed, but to protect the sensibilities of the women. Sometimes the men were not too diligent about covering themselves, as told in this story from the Dixon, Illinois Evening Telegraph in 1890. The boys who go in swimming in the mill race expose themselves altogether too much, so that ladies cannot with comfort pass through Water Street. The marshal should see to this. They should wear proper swimming suits. So why didn't the men want to wear suits? The swimsuits that were available at that time were made of wool and covered the entire torso. They were uncomfortable and fairly expensive for working-class people, so most men would not wear one unless they were at a public beach where men and women swam together. The women wore the same kind of torso-covering suit. When swimming moved indoors, males would generally swim separately from females, and therefore did not need to wear the uncomfortable suits. Like the Michigan State University swim team shown here in 1938, men would often practice without suits, but for public swim meets where women were present, of course they had to put on the suits. In the early days, this was apparently not enforced for the youngest swimmers. This New York Times article from 1909 about the elementary school swimming championships refers to the swimmers in the 80-pound division who, quote, discovered in their trial heats that their swimming trunks impeded them, and that they could swim faster nude. Thereafter the rule about trunks went into the discard, and very small boys in a state of nature swam like tadpoles through the many heats necessary to a decision. Also bear in mind that indoor plumbing was not universal in the old days. Many men took their baths in the nearest body of water, and they often bathed in groups. The Ivory Soap Company advertised its product with images of men bathing outdoors. In the summer, Ivory Soap ran text ads like this: "It is hot and all the boys are going swimming. Let your boys go too. Give them a couple of towels and a cake of Ivory Soap and let them go. Thus will you achieve a double purpose. The boys will have a swim which is good and a bath which is better." In World War II, Cannon Towels ran this ad describing how American GIs put cargo nets across a river to keep out crocodiles so they could go swimming. Then they dried off with Cannon Towels. This is typical of images of that time that used male nudity to signify health and vigor. There was nothing unusual about this image. It was a reflection of reality. Men swimming without women around usually swam without suits, whether it was in New York's East River or in the outback of Australia. When swimming moved indoors, the largest and most influential organization teaching swimming was the YMCA.